Hi guys, hi YouTubers, hi fellows.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Increase the Cyber Resilience of Your Business, where we will discuss about the main topics that you need to know about cyber resilience in 2021. My name is Ana Diaconu. I am a marketing program manager at Bitdefender and will be your host today. It is my pleasure to welcome my colleagues, Bogdan Cârlescu, cybersecurity professional, and Cristina Vătămanu, senior team lead in the Cyber Threat Intelligence Lab. Bogdan is a cybersecurity professional with a systems engineering background and extensive experience in product management and product marketing. He currently acts as Senior Product Marketing Manager for Bitdefender Enterprise Security Solutions. Cristina has joined Bitdefender more than 10 years ago. She is now leading the cybercrime team in Romania that handles sensitive cases of targeted attacks, working side by side with law enforcement agencies for gathering evidences against cybercrime criminal groups. Before we start, a few housekeeping rules. Please know that you are muted as we are recording this webinar. We will provide access to the recording within the next couple of days after the session. Throughout the webinar, we encourage you to submit your questions. We are going to host a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And now over to you, Bogdan.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining this session dedicated to a very hot topic, how can an enterprise increase their resilience when faced with cyber threats and cyber attacks. We will tackle the topic from a few key perspectives. First, we will speak of cyber resilience and cybersecurity and why they are different topics. Second, we will see what we've learned from first-hand experience with organizations around the world about the importance of cyber resilience. Third, we will look on two of the applicable industry frameworks, and here I speak of NIST and MITRE. And last but not least important for sure are the practical steps to help you build cyber resilience in your business. So let's start by clarifying what cyber resilience is and why is it distinct from cybersecurity as a topic. And maybe even more important, which of the two is the best approach to the problem of cyber threats and the cyber risks that these threats are posing to business operations. Cybersecurity is definitely the most established term of the two and refers to people, technologies, processes that serve as a line of defense against cyber threats. Cybersecurity is centered on the idea that attacks can be prevented. So it creates the expectation that organizations will be able to avoid being hit by attackers and it will not suffer cyber breaches. Without any doubt, preventing breaches from happening is something that everyone wants, but unfortunately, 100% protection and effectiveness is not achievable. And the recent year proved again and again that cyber threats are getting increasingly sophisticated, and the organizations and as well as individuals are affected in direct or indirect manner. Now, opposite to the core idea of preventing breaches, cyber resilience is based on the principle that some attacks will go through and organizations must prepare themselves to quickly and effectively deal with the consequences. Cyber resilience represents the organization's ability to avoid, to prepare for, to respond, and to recover quickly after a cyber attack. Now, being ready to respond to security incidents also enables organizations to mitigate the consequences of cyber breaches and resume quicker the normal state of business operations. So this makes cyber resilience as an integral part of business continuity planning. And this is a first hint of the superiority of cyber resilience approach compared to cybersecurity when considered from visibility and larger context perspective. Now, are cybersecurity and cyber resilience fully distinct approaches? Not completely. They do overlap quite a bit, but both cybersecurity and cyber resilience strive to limit the effect of cyber threats on businesses. They have in common tools, technologies, procedures, and both are good objectives for organizations to focus on, but cyber resilience offers a more holistic and a more realistic approach. Now, before getting into how an organization can systematically improve their resilience against threats, I would like to invite my colleague Christina to share some key learnings about cyber resilience. Learnings that she acquired through first-hand experience, first-hand interactions with organizations that had to deal with cyber incidents and cyber breaches. Hi, Christina.
Hello, Bogdan. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Bogdan, again for today's invitation. Well, to start, cyber resilience is a term that gathers all the to-dos that a company must check before an incident, during an incident, and after an incident. Because the truth is data breaches do happen and can happen to anyone. It's important to prevent them, but it's also important to respond to them. Now, prevention is the best medicine. It's always better to avoid an attack than to have your security solution detected. But, and it is the first important step that an organization should consider. But, you know, there's a saying that in some cases, the threat actors are helped by the victims themselves to succeed. Data breach does not happen because of one single mistake, you know, that first click. A complex attack is successful because of an entire chain of mistakes, starting with the patient zero and maybe ending up with the entire IT department. We are still seeing so many organizations using operating systems that have reached end of life. We are having cases where vulnerable applications are leveraged as point of entrance. So many risky environments with poorly policies in place. And for example, we all know that ransomware attacks have shifted to compromise enterprise environments because it's more profitable. And one of the main infection vectors they use is brute forcing passwords. And they are succeeding because the policies that are in place allow employees to use weak passwords. And managing enterprise environments can be overwhelming. You know, tracing each aspect that can represent a risk for the company is very, very difficult. And omissions and mistakes can happen. You either have users that store password in clear text, or users that can access some resources that they should not be able to access, that have more rights than they should have, or you can have important documents which are not protected as they should be, or you can have an environment where there is no network segmentation, or every employer is bringing his own device at work, and so on. The more permissive a work environment is, the more risks are introduced. So it's very useful to have some kind of procedures that the staff can follow in order to increase the chances of covering all the risks you have in your company. And also, it is very important to check them very rigorously. For example, it's not good that you mark as read all the alerts your security solution provides you, although maybe sometimes there are plenty. But if you analyze them, you might observe that a person from the accounting department, for example, is connecting to your production server via RDP, which is usually not that good. So prevention is the first important step that one should take care of, and it's necessary that all the measures be very well checked. And recommendations for preventions are widely covered on so many channels. You know, you have patch management systems, you have layered security, restrictive policies for your employees, security training for your employees, which is very, very important. You can adopt a concept of a zero net or of a zero trust network, or you can implement some risk management programs. You can have security audits and so on. These are very important as a preventive state and should be completed with maximum responsibility, because again, prevention is the best treatment. But what enterprise environments, enterprise sector should understand is the fact that unfortunate incidents can happen to them. And it's important to prepare to avoid them, but it's also important to prepare to respond to them, because time is of the essence in this situation, and one should know exactly what to do when it receives the news you have been breached, you know, besides panicking. So when you find yourself in the middle of a breach, how many of us know what to do, where to start? How many companies have some procedures in place that should be followed in these situations? And I'm telling you, very few. During the 10, 11 years I've been doing forensic investigations, I think chaos is the perfect word to describe the picture. In all of these years we've handled these cases, we have dealt with so many problems that have come with the forensic process, which is hard to be done by default. But we have often encountered circumstances where if things were done differently, the puzzle the forensic team has to put together to find out what happened would have been completed. And these problems are from multiple areas. For example, first you have the communication with the victim. Often they tend not to tell the whole story from the beginning, mainly because of sensitive information or because they want to keep a part of the incident internally. But unfortunately, it usually is a key element in the investigation. And if the team, the forensic team, would have known it sooner, significant time would have been gained. So in this particular moment, in my opinion, one should put in balance what is more important. One must keep in mind that even if some details are omitted in the first discussion, they might surface during the investigation. So the more details a forensic team knows, the more fast it can solve the case and the company can resume its activity. So in my opinion, one should sign all the NDAs that are necessary, but should provide as much information as possible to the investigative team.
Christina, if I may have a question at this moment, I think this is relevant for the audience. You speak about NDAs, and we all know that this takes a lot of time to build. So should NDA and other type of legal agreements be ready in advance, meaning as part of the preparation effort, not necessarily of the time of the managing the incident itself?
Well, that would be the ideal case. Legal issues usually take time, and what you don't have in the middle of a breach is exactly that time. So yes, they should prepare some kind of NDA templates and should be included in that procedure that I mentioned earlier, and to be used if necessary and or when necessary, and to be built depending on each one's necessity. Now, thank you for the question. Going back, another problem, big problem that we are facing very often is the lack of necessary information. And while there are plenty examples here, so I'm just going to try to highlight just a few of them. For example, not having logging enabled prior to the incident. The forensic investigation is based on analyzing evidences. If those evidence are missing, the forensic team cannot respond to questions such as how it happened, what damages were caused, what they took, and so on. It's true that logs consume an amount of disk space to be stored, and probably additional hardware costs are required. But for example, nowadays, since most of the attacks are fileless, most of the evidence we find is in these particular logs, system-based logs, traffic logs, application logs, and so on. So it's important to prepare for this type of situations, and a good logging process is a good way to do that. And because I've mentioned fileless attacks, another situation we often encounter is the following. So the company realizes that some of the machines are compromised, and they decide to shut them down in order to prevent further damages. Well, the best way to see what was executed in the case of a fileless attack is to inspect the memory of that system. If you shut down the machine, the evidence are deleted. So again, the forensic team does not have the necessary information to answer some questions. So it's important to isolate the compromised computers, but shutting them down is not the best way to do it. And another example that falls somewhere in the same situation is the fact that the staff, once it realizes that it has some computers compromised, it decides to wipe them clean. This happens either because of a moment of panic, or because in the beginning they don't realize the magnitude of the situation, or because the organization does not have the resources for backup hardware and they need to resume some activities. And the white machines usually are patient zero, domain controller, or other servers with very important role in the infrastructure. So again, the forensic teams don't have any data to analyze. So being a victim in a data breach has huge impacts, and fast decisions have to be made. And this is why it's very useful to have some procedures in place, because some errors of this kind may be omitted this way. And the company can provide the necessary information to the investigative team.
If I may have a question before you go to the next point, Christina. It seems that you have a lot of, let's say, experiences on the negative side with organizations that are not prepared for this type of situations. Did you had also some positive experiences with organizations that were maybe better prepared, in a better state, and able to provide you with what you needed as an investigation team to perform the job?
Well, we are trained to see the problems, so this is why I'm emphasizing the problems. As I've said, managing enterprise environments is very difficult, and having everything perfect settled is a huge job to do it. But we did have cases where some areas were very well covered by the organizations. For example, we had a victim from the healthcare sector, which had a very good logging process in place. And the communication was also very good, so we were able to find out quickly what happened. We also had a victim from the financial sector, which prepared very well the systems to be analyzed. They also had the resources for backup hardware, so we were able to analyze each point of the attack very well. We were not pressured from this point of view. So yes, I think organizations are starting to develop an effort, to make an effort to prepare for this kind of breaches, kind of data breaches. And now, if I may go back, I just want to highlight a final important aspect from my perspective. Important in the post-investigative phase. All the investigations are finalized with a set of recommendations for the company for the problems encountered in their environment, and these recommendations should be considered and implemented. And what I would personally find useful is after remediation, the organization should also perform a security audit in order to be sure that the problems were properly fixed. Now, to conclude, prevention is very important, but organizations should also set their mind into the fact that data breaches do happen, and they have to respond to this type of incidents, so that some damages could be minimized, to reduce the downtime, to be able to resume activity as quickly as possible, to be able to restore infrastructure as quickly as possible, and to fix the existing problems. Thank you.
Christina, thank you very much for the insights, for the practical examples that you shared with us around cyber resilience and security incidents. We will get back to the practical approach to cyber resilience in the last part of the presentation. But before doing that, I would like to spend a couple of minutes on checking two of the industry frameworks that can help us structure the approach. And we have here the Developing Cyber Resilience Systems, which is a special publication by NIST, and the MITRE's Structured Cyber Resilience Analysis Methodology. Now, there is no way we can get through the details of these frameworks in a couple of minutes. We have in total around 250 pages of not exactly a bedtime literature. So I will only focus on some key takeaways that are valuable for the immediate practical application. We'll start with NIST. You also have some details about these organizations on the slide. If you don't know them, you will get the slide and you can check them. Both organizations are dealing with standards, with frameworks. NIST is a government organization, and MITRE is a private nonprofit organization. Now, going back, I said that I will start with NIST, as this is the most comprehensive framework of the two. though it is more difficult to navigate because of the sheer volume, the value of this publication is in the extensive support that provides for the why, for the what, and also for the indications on how to approach the problem of cyber resilience. NIST defines resilience as the ability to anticipate, to withstand, recover from, and adapt to adverse conditions, stresses, attacks, or compromises on systems that use or are enabled by cyber resources. These cyber resilient systems can withstand cyber attacks, faults, failures, and they can also continue to operate even in degraded or debilitated state. So they can continue on delivering mission essential functions while ensuring that safety and information security are preserved. And this is very important. This definition reveals 4 key principles or characteristics of cyber resilience. First is focus on the mission or business function. So cyber resilience is always connected to what the business needs to do. Second, it focuses on the effects of advanced persisting threats or APTs. It assumes that the adversary will compromise or breach the system or organization at some point. And it also assumes that the adversary will maintain a presence in the system or the organization. These principles are very important because they are correctly framing the approach to cyber resilience. So what is this framework stating? First of all, whenever we discuss about cyber resilience, we need to focus on the key capabilities that are supporting the organizational business functions. This should happen despite an attacker present in the systems or in the infrastructure, attacker that is threatening the mission critical systems and also system components. Second, this definition of cyber resilience also includes basically all the threats to the system, but the focus is on the cyber resilience analysis of the effects of APTs. Why APTs? Because of the persistent and the long-term effects of these ones, and we'll get back to this later. Now, the framework also states that sophisticated adversary cannot be always kept out of the systems and also cannot be quickly detected and removed, even despite the quality of the system design and the proper functioning of the security components. So this assumption acknowledges that the modern systems are large and complex, and attackers will always be able to find an exploit and a weakness that they can exploit, and they can find flaws in the systems, in the environment, or in the supply chains. And last, any discussion about cyber resilience assume that the adversary may their presence actually in the system may be a long-term issue because of the stealthy nature of APT. So this is what this framework is stating. This is what these are the reference point that we should always have in mind when talking about cybersecurity. Now, within the context of this framework, cyber resilience sits on 4 key goals: anticipate, withstand, recover, and adapt. And you will find these goals sometimes with a little bit different wording in the most cyber resilience definitions. But the meaning, even if they use different wording, is always the same. So anticipate means maintaining a state of preparedness for adversity. Withstand means the ability to continue essential business functions despite adversity. Recover means restoring the mission and business functions during the adversity and after. And adapt means modifying the business functions or modifying the support capabilities in order to predict changes in the technical, in the operational, or in the threat environment. So these are the high-level goals, if you want to call it like that, of cyber resilience. Now, because cyber resilience, like cybersecurity, is a concern for multiple levels in the organizations, these 4 goals are essential in providing connections, linkage between various functions and levels in the organization. For example, the organization risk management strategy can use cyber resilience goals and cyber resilience strategy to incorporate cyber resilience within the overall risk management framework. So it's always a story about the whole, about everything that is happening. Now, to go from the concept, from the goals to implementing cyber resilience, NIST publication translates this 4 high-level goals into more pragmatic cyber resiliency objectives. And these are more specific statements of what the systems and the IT environment in general must achieve in order to meet the stakeholder needs, expectations in terms of resiliency. So let's have a quick view on each of them. Starting with the first one, the prevent and avoid. This states that the environment should prevent the successful execution of an attack or the realization of conditions that are specific to attacks. Second is to prepare, and that means maintaining a set of realistic courses of action that addresses what we expect to happen, so the adversity that we predicted and anticipated. Third is to continue, and this refers to the ability of the business function to continue during adversity. You also find this in the goals. Some of this explanation, some of this descriptions are also part of the goals itself. So that should not be a surprise for us. The fourth element is to constrain, and that means limiting the damage of ongoing attacks. After constraining, of course, you want to reconstitute, and that means to restore as much as possible and as quickly as possible the mission and the business functions after the attack happened. Then we have understanding, and this is very interesting because it tells about a clear view of dependencies between business functions and the status of cyber resources, of course, in the context of possible attacks. So we want to know what is happening if some resources is affected, what business function is affected. Then we have transform, and that means modifying the business functions, the supporting processes in order to be able to better handle adversity, which is very close to re-architect, but this refers to the modifying of the architecture that improves the ability to handle difficult situations and ongoing attacks. The goals and the objectives taken together provide a vocabulary for describing what properties and capabilities needs to be built in the architecture in order to increase resilience. And this vocabulary is very important as many stakeholders can and must contribute to the cyber resilience effort. And here we include program managers, mission owners, cyber defenders, and any other business officials that have a stake in this space. So, and they need to understand, they need to learn whether the resources that they are taking care of or the resources that they are using are sufficiently resilient against advanced cyber threats, and if they are not, what needs to be done in order to improve this resilience. Now, this is not an easy question to answer, and to help providing answers to the question, NIST and MITRE also provide frameworks for that, processes. NIST provides a structured approach in the form of the cyber resilience analysis process, and this is a process that it is leveraging some previous work that was done by MITRE. This work is included in the second framework that I mentioned, the MITRE Structured Cyber Resilience Analysis Methodology, or SCRAM. SCRAM actually provides a very quick and effective way to answer the questions regarding cyber resilience. And although it is an older publication, it was published in 2016, in my view, the way it presents the information makes it easier to put in practice compared to NIST. But if you look at both publications, you will essentially find the same process for analyzing cyber resilience. So let's have a look at it. This is a 5-step process, and it includes understanding the context, establishing the initial cyber resilience baseline, analyzing the systems, defining and analyzing specific alternatives, and finally developing recommendations. Each step provides answer to specific questions. So let's look one by one. The first step will answer the question, what do we care about? It establishes the purpose of the entire work, of the entire cyber resilience analysis. The people that will perform the analysis and also the stakeholders around will use, the stakeholders that will use the result of this analysis, they must establish a common understanding of the context. They must agree on what information will be provided, as Christina mentioned previously, what will be the assumptions. They will also identify and let's say properly document the factors that will represent constraints. Now, second step, answer the question, what can we build on? What is already in place? So as I mentioned at the beginning, cyber resilience overlaps with cybersecurity quite a bit, and it overlaps also with other business continuity planning efforts. So activities in this step try to establish a baseline of the existing systems. So making sure we understand what existing capabilities exist and how they can contribute to the cyber resilience analysis and implementation. Then we want to understand how the cyber risks affect the overall business risks, not overall business, but the overall business risks. The activities in this step look at the business architecture, the processes of, let's say, business functions, but also on the system architecture in order to identify how an advanced attacker, by taking advantage of the systems architecture and design, could affect the business effectiveness. So this is linked, if you remember, to the understanding objective of cyber resilience. The next step, we are trying to see how we can improve the business resilience. So there are a wide variety of cyber resilience techniques that correspond to approaches and technologies. Some of this will not be feasible in the context of the, let's say, decision to do this resilience analysis. Activities in this step identify and analyze specific alternatives, specific solutions for improving resiliency. And finally, the last step, taking the final decision. What do we recommend? Cyber resilience techniques are not something standalone. They are interdependent. They interact with techniques from cybersecurity, with processes from business continuity. Thus, we need to analyze the combination. We need to analyze which influences what. So all of this in the context of the constraint factors that we identify at the beginning. So this step actually produces the recommendation that are consistent with the purpose of the cyber resilience analysis. Now, what is obvious when we look at these steps is the criticality of stakeholder engagement. Program management office, user community, operations, security, they all need to be engaged in various stages of the process. Without strong engagement from these stakeholders, the result of the analysis risks as becoming useless. So it will be an effort that no one will be able to use. To help executing on this process, both frameworks, NIST and MITRE, also includes detailed activities that need to be carried out on each step. And only as an example, I will provide the diagram that is included with the MITRE Scrum framework. I know this is very busy, and it's beyond the scope of this discussion to get into all the details of the process. Keep in mind, though, that this is a blueprint. this can and should be tailored for the needs of each organization. The scope of the resilience analysis can be larger and can be smaller. For example, the process can be tailored to analyze the potential resiliency improvements that could be achieved when integrating a specific new technology. Or we can tailor the same process to be used for identifying ways to ensure cyber resilience against a specific threat scenario. Now, as I mentioned, unfortunately, due to limitations that we have today, we cannot go through this process in details. So I want to have a look only on 3 practical elements of this framework. And those are cyber resilience and risk management, how the goals, objectives, and techniques are used during this process, and third, how to develop solutions. So let's quickly start with the first one. Those of you that are familiar with risk management might have noticed the common ground between cyber risk analysis and cyber resilience analysis. And this is not a coincidence. Organizations manage the mission, the business functions, and the risks associated with this as a larger portfolio of risks. And here we include cyber, we include financial, we include reputational risk, we include requirements that arise from legislation, regulation, policies, and standards. So this is a holistic approach. Now, a proposed solution that targets cyber resilience can also have impacts on other risks, can reduce some risks, for example, supply chain risk, reputational risk, performance risk. However, it can also increase other type of risks like financial costs or schedule risk. And this is why cyber resilience efforts needs to be approached in the context of the overall risk management strategy at organizational level. So cyber resilience will complement the risk management framework, as it can provide cyber risks to be analyzed in the context of the overall risk management framework. But the cyber resilience analysis can also use input from the risk management framework tasks in order to help, let's say, executing the resiliency analysis. So they are interacting, they are overlapping quite a bit. Now, let's see how the goals, objectives, and techniques are used during the process. As I began with describing those, I think it's worth having a look on how they are used during the process. So looking specifically at the second step of the process, this is meant to evaluate how cyber resilience is already implemented in organizations, and also the extent to which the different aspects of cyber resilience, like goal, objectives, and techniques, are relevant in the context of the environment. We are also interested to identify what opportunities for improvements exist. So this step actually allows organizations to evaluate the robustness of their current security architecture and how well this architecture serves the higher level business mission and critical function. Here I included an output of this step. I know this is complicated, so I will explain a little bit. You can see from the left to right the goals, the objectives, and the technique areas that are that are also include corresponding importance or relevance, current use, priority for future improvements. This is the result of interviews, is the result of analysis of the implemented elements in the organization. The cyber resilience technique that you see on the right-hand side table are also part of the framework, so you don't have to invent them. NIST especially is very descriptive for each of them. This table is a very valuable input for the last practical element, but that I will cover. But before doing that, I just want to make a comment. I mentioned in the previous slide that MITRE is also the creator of the ATT&CK framework. This is an excellent instrument to furthermore test how robust is the security architecture. It allows the security teams to evaluate how well the existing solutions are able to cover all the steps, the tools, techniques, procedures that an attacker might leverage against the organization. We already ran quite a few sessions dedicated to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, so I will not get into the details. I will provide the links to these sessions in the follow-up of this webinar. Now, moving to the final element that I want to touch today, let's have a look on how to develop specific alternatives, specific solutions to improve resilience. You might have noticed that I jumped over some steps, and that's not due to the lack of importance of them in the process, but to the time limitation. For example, step number 3, which is before this one, is particularly important as it analyzes the cyber risk exposure. This step on its own worth a dedicated session, but today we'll skip it and go to the next one, which is developing solutions. This one is focused on identifying specific ways to make happen the desired improvements. So we consider here ways to implement cyber resilience techniques in the context of the existing architecture, or change the security architecture if that is required. All the improvements should be evaluated and analyzed in terms of potential effectiveness. Now, all the solutions that we analyze here can be purely technical, purely procedural, or they might be a combination of the two. Sorry. And to help on this direction, the NIST framework provides a wealth of details on how the cyber resilience technique translate into cyber resilience approaches. The approaches being a subset of technologies and processes that define specifically how capabilities should be implemented and how the intended consequences are achieved. So it's pretty descriptive from this perspective. Now, as you can see, choosing security technologies is almost the last step in the cyber resiliency analysis process. Making technology choices too early might lead to spending valuable resources on technologies that are not effective in the context of the overall scope, or also might lead to not spending the resources where they matter most. So the technology might be effective to some extent, but might not represent the best investment in terms of providing the expected outcomes. Now, let's get to a practical example. Let's assume that during the risk baselining step, the one that I mentioned previously, we identified the analytical monitoring as an area of high importance that currently has a low usage and it has significant room for improvement. To explain, the analytical monitoring requires to monitor, to analyze a wide range of properties, of behaviors of the systems on an ongoing basis and in a very coordinated way. Now, to this technique, we have 3 corresponding resiliency approaches: monitoring and damage assessment, sensor fusion and analysis, and forensics and behavioral analysis. Due to the fact that we have only a few minutes left, I will not get into the details of each particular element, but I'll provide the slides and you can get the details. Now, if you will look into the details, some of you that are familiar with endpoint detection and response as a solution will recognize that some of these capabilities are included within EDR. What EDR misses for this particular use case is the specific, let's say, focus on putting together multiple types of data, so sensor fusion. But the good news is that EDR is expanding to include also data from other infrastructure elements, so covering that particular miss. And this extension towards other elements is called extended detection and response. The XDR aims to provide detection and response analytic capabilities for a larger part of the enterprise infrastructure. And this allows it to score better for the analytic monitoring cyber resilience technique and represent a better candidate compared to EDR in this context. Now, an organization might decide to build the corresponding processes for this technology in-house or choose to externalize that to a third party, let's say, organization. And to continue on the EDR XDR example, an enterprise might staff a smaller or larger security operations team depending on the context, but they may also consider getting managed detection and response solutions as an alternative. And this is a value proposition that includes technology, and it includes also security operating services, and that focus directly on outcomes. And because of that, it can map directly to the cyber resilience objective. So it's a solution that maps even better compared to XDR in this context. What I'm providing now is different types of different alternatives for solving the same problem. Now, these alternatives have pluses and minuses, and all these alternatives will go into the last step of the cyber resilience analysis process. And this in this step, we analyze these multiple alternatives, assessing them in the larger context and identifying which one is the best to be recommended as a course of action. Now, without being fully comprehensive on all the topics, we covered quite a bit of ground today, and I want to make sure that everything falls into one single place. So I prepared a summary slide that recaps everything that we covered today. So what do we have? What have we covered in this webinar? We started with looking at what's the difference between cyber resilience and cybersecurity. Then we looked on why cyber resilience is so important, and we looked at on some practical examples that shows us the value of cyber resilience. Then we looked on the NIST framework, on how NIST defines specific goals, objectives, techniques, and approaches for cyber resilience. To get from concept to implementation, we looked on the Scrum methodology from MITRE that defines, as well as NIST does, defines a process that helps organization goes from the beginning to the end of the cyber resilience analysis process. And lastly, I picked and choose a few elements of this process and gave you a few hints on how cyber resilience and risk management relate, how the goals that we just defined, the objectives and techniques are used during this process. And also we looked on a principle on how to develop specific solutions that solve identified let's say gaps, and I also mentioned here the technologies that I mentioned: EDR, XDR, and MDR. Now, having that said, we reached the end of the session. I think we have just a couple of minutes for questions. So let's see what questions we have.
Thank you. First of all, thanks, Bogdan. Yes, sure. Thank you for the presentation to you and to Christina. Yeah, let's go through the questions. We have a few minutes left. I'm going to start reading them. The first one, if you would like to choose only three steps that an organization should immediately take for cyber resilience, what would those be?
Okay, I'm gonna take this one. So only three. Well, first of all, an important thing is to review your environment and to identify potential risks that you have within your organization, and of course implement all the necessary measures to fix those risks. Second, I would say, well, to set the mind that data breaches do happen. and to prepare for them, both from the perspective of providing evidence to the investigative team, but also from the perspective of resuming activity as quickly as possible. And third, I can stress this enough, to implement procedures both for the preventive state, but also for the procedures that should be followed in case of an incident, in order to avoid some errors and omissions that can happen.
Thank you. And then one more question. How long would it take to go through all the resilience analysis process?
I can take that one. It's a very good question, and it's highly relevant to understand how long does this take when you start performing such a process. I mentioned at some point during the presentation that this process is highly tailorable, meaning that it covers quite different scenarios. For example, some organization might want to include a specific technology and might want to evaluate what would be the impact on cyber resilience of that particular technology. For such a process, the time horizon could be, I don't know, a few weeks, maybe even less. If we consider as a scope for the cyber resilience process, the analysis of the overall environment of an organization, for sure that will mean a few good months, depending on the number of resources that can be involved into the process. I can see another question that popped up. I think it's the last one that we can take until the top of the hour. Is it possible to produce a generalized approach on how to react to a cyber breach? And or does it always depend on specific installation or hardware mix? Reacting to a cyber breach is, I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all approach, although there exists quite a bit of frameworks and way to design this process. Of course, Christina already mentioned some things that needs to always need to be considered when preparing for a cyber breach. But it always needs to be put in the context of the business, of the organization. So what are the assets? What is the impact of those assets to the business function if those assets are not available anymore or are damaged? So it always depends on the criticality of the cyber resources for the business when deciding how to respond to cyber breaches. But as I mentioned, there are frameworks that can guide you on the way of achieving that. And I think we are close to the top of the hour, so
we should right on time. Yes, thank you very much for all the presentations and for answering the questions, all the detail. Very interesting, Bogdan, Christina. And also, I would like to thank the audience for taking the time to join us today. We will share the presentation and the recording in the upcoming days, and we wish you all a great rest of the day. See you soon in our upcoming webinars. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
If you need to contact us for further information, you can reach us on the website that's going to be in the description. You can also contact us on our live chat service. You can contact us on the YouTube comments. We'd be more than happy to assist you. You can reach us at acs@cyberservices.com. And the contact numbers are +44 for international dial, and that would be 1704 893 447. You can also reach me on my mobile at 07494 027783. If you need to contact us on any further information about webinars or demos, please let us know, and I and one of the team would be very happy to assist you. Thank you. But please note that when you are coming to us with regard to an educational request, please also send in some form of identification, or if you are a member of staff, say the IT administrator, please send in a letter from the head teacher with a manual signature so that we can apply an educational discount. But please be aware that you may have to buy so many licenses